Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a really important and timely subject, understanding and addressing workplace injustice.
Mm.
You, our listener, have provided us with some excellent resources, and we're going to take a close look at Kim Scott's Just Work to pull out the key insights,
Yeah.
the ones that can help us all navigate these complex issues.
Yeah, and it's worth remembering that everyone comes to this with different backgrounds, different levels of technical know-how, different experiences.
Okay, 'cause,
So our aim isn't really to get bogged down in academic jargon, but more to give you a clear, useful understanding of what's most important. We want those moments where things kind of click into place, right? Without feeling totally overwhelmed.
Right. Think of this as a direct route to getting informed quickly but thoroughly. We're going to explore the different ways workplace injustice shows up. Bias, prejudice, bullying, discrimination, harassment, the whole spectrum.
And the goal is really to focus on, well, potential solutions, ways to maybe foster more equitable environments, all based on the material you've shared.
Okay, so let's dive in. Kim Scott, the author, she starts with some really personal stuff, doesn't she?
She does, experiences from early in her career back when she was in Moscow. And these stories, they immediately bring the often harsh realities of workplace sexism right into focus.
Yeah, it's quite eye-opening. She talks about being forced out of company housing, basically because she was a young woman.
Right.
And her boss's explanation, just Russia is a sexist society. It felt like such a dismissal, leaving her scrambling for a place to live, dealing with potentially unsafe transport.
It really highlights how sexism can impact safety, basic living needs, and that fear, the fear of speaking up.
Yeah, it stops people reporting even really severe things.
And it wasn't only the housing. Her salary was way off, too, even after a raise. But what really struck me was her saying she felt safer on the streets of Moscow at night than in her own home with a company executive.
That speaks volumes, doesn't it? About the power dynamics, the potential for abuse right there.
Absolutely chilling, yeah.
And so she decided not to report any of it to HR, which, when you hear her reasons...
It's completely understandable. Fear of backlash and this awful assumption that because she dated a colleague before, she was somehow fair game.
Yeah, that insidious way blame gets shifted onto the person who's been harmed. It's just,
Well, what's interesting is she's very upfront about why she's sharing this. She says, look, I'm sharing stories of getting things right and wrong.
To help others, right? Like a resource based on lived experience.
Exactly. Learning from mistakes, sharing those lessons, it's relatable.
And it's important, I think, that she acknowledges her own privilege, too.
Crucial point.
Being white, straight, American, healthy, economically comfortable. She knows her difficulties happened within a context of advantages many don't have.
And that awareness fuels a sense of responsibility, to address injustices faced by those without those privileges.
So moving from the personal to the systemic, the book talks about how ineffective inequity actually is for businesses.
Right. It brings in that McKinsey study. Pretty stark statistic. Companies in the bottom quarter for gender and ethnic diversity, they were 29% less likely to hit above average profitability.
Wow, 29%. So this isn't just about fairness, is it? It directly impacts success.
Not at all. It's a business case, plain and simple. Creating a just workplace isn't just the right thing. It's the smart thing.
Okay, so why? Why do homogenous teams underperform like that?
Well, the book explains it's because they often become these kind of self-reinforcing bubbles. People naturally connect with people similar to themselves.
Right, like attracts like.
Exactly, which leads to homogenous networks. And that then biases hiring. People on hiring committees might lean towards someone less qualified just because they know them, or they fit the existing mold.
The talented people from different backgrounds can't even get a foot in the door.
Precisely, regardless of their skills. And that lack of diverse perspectives, it creates blind spots, missed opportunities, and ultimately, lower profits.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly and look at radical candor. We've talked about that concept before, but the book adds some important nuances.
It does. While radical candor, challenging directly while caring personally worked well for her, she found it was, significantly harder for folks who weren't straight white men to actually put into practice.
Interesting. Even straight white men had some issues.
Yeah, some reported feeling hesitant, like they worried that showing they cared personally might get misinterpreted, especially with women colleagues, seen as romantic interest or something.
Oh, right. That potential misreading.
And others worried about being direct and getting labeled as mansplaining.
So navigating that feedback space is tricky.
Yeah.
depending on who you are.
It really is. And the book points out a critical double standard here. Men worry about mansplaining, which, let's be honest, rarely tanks a career.
True.
But women, they get labeled abrasive for similar directness, and that actually does impact promotions. It's the same behavior judged totally differently based on gender.
Yeah. The book also connects these workplace issues to bigger societal things happening at the time.
Absolutely. The author explicitly mentions #MeToo, bringing gender injustice to the forefront,
And then COVID.
which starkly expose economic and racial inequalities. And, of course, the murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, igniting this huge movement against systemic racism and violence.
You can really feel the weight of that period. She was editing the book right in the middle of all that, plus the pandemic challenges.
Yeah, it gives the whole exploration this sense of urgency, makes it feel very necessary right now.
That urgency definitely comes through when she talks about bullying.
Oh, absolutely. She's very direct. Bullying has to have real consequences to stop.
Because often the bully intends to cause harm.
That's her argument. Often they aren't just unaware, they're intentionally trying to inflict harm, maintain power. So just appealing to empathy, probably not going to work, might even backfire.
That's a tough pill to swallow, but probably true in many cases.
Mm.
It really highlights the need for actual accountability systems.
Def-
Now, the book also gets into how our ability, and maybe our responsibility, to act changes depending on our role in the organization.
Yes, there are specific chapters looking at this. Are you the person harmed? Are you the one causing harm? An upstander? A leader? Each role has different levers, different limitations when facing injustice.
And interestingly, it also says it's okay not to respond sometimes.
It does. It validates that choice, acknowledging the risks involved. It stresses personal agency and also self-forgiveness if you look back and wish you'd done something differently.
That feels compassionate.
Yeah.
Recognizing the emotional toll.
It is. It sees the power dynamics, the potential fallout. The key is making a conscious choice in the moment, whatever it is, to reclaim some control. And yeah, self-compassion if you have regrets later. Focus on learning for next time.
Okay, let's flip that. What about when we cause harm? Intentionally or not?
Right. The core message there is listen. Actively listen. And take responsibility for the impact of your actions, whatever your intention was.
Even if you didn't mean it or didn't think anyone would notice.
Doesn't matter. You caused harm. The crucial thing is how you react when someone points it out. Do you get defensive, or do you actually take the feedback on board and try to understand?
This leads into some great examples the book uses. The safety pin anecdote really sticks out.
Yeah, that one's powerful. Shows how quickly we make assumptions based on perceived roles, often fueled by bias.
She's a speaker at an event, and some guy just rudely asks her for a safety pin, assuming she's staff.
Exactly. And her reflection is key. She realized that as a speaker, she was in a leadership position in that moment. She felt she had a responsibility to push back against that rudeness, not just for herself, but for the actual event staff who might face that all the time.
That contrasts really sharply with the fist bump moment she also describes.
It does. That one highlights how differently people experience these things. For her white male colleague, getting a fist bump instead of a handshake from a black colleague felt like a notable, positive moment of allyship.
A unique experience for him.
Right. But for her, as a woman in tech, those safety pin moments, the incorrect assumptions, the subtle slights based on gender, they're almost routine. It's part of the systemic bias she faces daily.
So it's a unique positive for one person. It's just exhausting background noise for another.
Precisely. And the book gives more examples, doesn't it?
It does. The Latino CEO mistaken for a valet.
Or the wife of an African man assumed to be hotel staff at conferences. These might seem minor, but they reveal deep biases about race and status.
And the task assumptions, too. Office housework.
Oh, yeah. Women or others from underrepresented groups expected to take notes, plan parties, regardless of their actual job or seniority.
And then there are the more subtle things. Interrupting, talking over people.
Ignoring ideas until someone else says them heap eating, which apparently got worse on video calls.
Yes.
Or lecturing the author about her own biography, using wrong names or pronouns, or appropriating ideas.
Taking credit for a woman's idea.
Yeah. These things might seem small in isolation, but they add up. They create this climate of exclusion, undermine people's sense of value.
So how do you respond? The book introduces I statements as a tool.
Right. It's a way to talk about the impact on you without direct accusation. Instead of, you always interrupt me, it's, I feel unheard when I get interrupted.
focuses on your experience, invites them to see your side.
Exactly. Phrases like, I don't think you meant that the way it sounded, but let me tell you how I heard it, can open a dialogue, maybe uncover unconscious bias or just a misunderstanding.
So less confrontational, more about opening a conversation.
Generally, yes. It's often a better first response to suspected unconscious bias than a direct accusation, which just makes people defensive.
And it helps diagnose the situation.
That's a key benefit. If they respond politely, maybe apologize, try and understand it probably was unconscious bias. If they get aggressive or dismissive, might be prejudice or even bullying.
And you don't need 100% certainty it was bias to use an I statement.
No, absolutely not. Even if you're just feeling off about something, sharing your experience is valuable feedback. It gives them a chance to learn or to clarify if it was a misunderstanding.
But you still need to trust your perception of the impact.
Absolutely. Trust how it landed for you, but also be open to the possibility you might not have the full picture. And of course, sometimes the risks of speaking up are just too high. The book acknowledges that too.
But what are the potential upsides of speaking up when it feels possible?
Well, first, you interrupt the behavior right then and there. That can be empowering. Second, you might actually get the person to think, maybe even change their behavior long term.
Which helps everyone, not just you.
Exactly. And third, by speaking up respectfully, you help set a norm. You signal that this kind of thing isn't okay here, it gets called out. That's how cultures slowly change.
The book also talks about internal barriers, though. Things that stop us even when we want to speak up. Like her business school story.
Yeah, that's a powerful one. She wanted to object to this Prejudice article in class, but she just couldn't. Fear. Fear that, as a woman in that environment, any show of emotion would be policed by gender bias. That she'd be seen as irrational, overly sensitive, and lose credibility.
Wow. So the bias itself silences dissent.
Exactly. Even in a place supposedly about open discussion.
And this connects to that awful, persistent idea the book mentions that women are somehow responsible for managing men's behavior.
Ugh, yes. That completely unfair notion puts the burden on women to handle inappropriate behavior instead of holding men accountable for their own actions. It needs challenging.
But then, sometimes a more direct approach is needed. The book mentions you statements, like with the taxi incident.
Right, that's a great contrast. When that guy tried to steal her cab, she didn't say, I feel upset. She said very directly, you just tried to take my cab.
Shifts the focus immediately.
Totally. Forces them to acknowledge their action. It disrupted his attempt to just bulldoze her. Now, the book says this isn't always the best or safest tactic, but it shows how a direct used strategically, can sometimes de-escalate and help you reclaim agency.
It makes you think about the cumulative toll of not saying anything, of just swallowing those little incidents.
Yeah, the book has a great analogy for that. Ignoring microaggressions constantly. It's like a repetitive stress injury on your sense of agency, your self-worth.
Each one might seem small.
But over time, it erodes your confidence, your well-being. It's significant damage.
Let's talk about likability bias, especially for women leaders. What's the advice there?
The core message is, be yourself. Don't squash your talents or opinions to try and seem more likable, because that usually means conforming to narrow, biased expectations of how women should act.
Like, you have to be nice and competent, while men just need to be competent.
Pretty much. The book shares examples from Amy Cuddy and Natalie Kogan using wit and directness to push back on biased assumptions without losing their authenticity.
Okay, what about when you see bias happening to someone else? The book talks about statements for upstanders.
Yeah, this is a tool for a third party to intervene. Instead of pointing fingers, you focus on the behavior or the situation. Like, instead of, you're being sexist, you might say, it seems like there might be some gender bias here if we assume Sarah should take notes just because she's the woman in the room.
Frames it less personally, more about the dynamic.
Exactly. Points out the potential bias without making it an immediate personal attack. Might make the person more receptive to thinking about it.
And the book really stresses how vital upstanders are. The story about David in the restroom.
That's a powerful example. David's simple, direct intervention, saying it was wrong to deny her the restroom and offering a solution, completely changed the dynamic.
It shows asking for help isn't weakness.
It's strength and collective action by upstanders. That can really shift norms and build accountability.
But there are pitfalls for upstanders too, right? Like the knight in shining armor thing?
Yes, or the white savior complex. The danger is when helping becomes about the helper's ego, not about empowering the person harmed.
Making them seem like a helpless victim.
Right, which can actually reinforce bad power dynamics. And watch out for the opportunistic hypocrite, someone who jumps on a cause for personal gain, not genuine commitment.
So what does being a good upstander look like?
Fundamentally, it's recognizing that creating a fair, compassionate workplace is everyone's job, not just HR's, not just leaders, everyone.
Practical steps.
The book offers a sort of cheat sheet. Find a bias buster, someone you trust, to give you honest feedback on your own blind spots. Cultivate a growth mindset, see this as ongoing learning. And support each other, like the team helping ensure correct pronoun usage. It's about shared commitment.
What if you're the one called out? You said something wrong, unintentionally caused harm.
Okay, key steps here. The book calls it the HUA framework. Acknowledge the mistake, don't get defensive, apologize sincerely for the harm caused, and then make amends, take concrete steps to understand and prevent it from happening again.
The author shares a personal story about that, right?
Yeah, about making a racially insensitive comment. She stresses immediately owning the error and its impact. Changing biased habits takes effort. It feels awkward, but vulnerability and self-forgiveness are part of the process.
So it's an ongoing journey, not a quick fix.
Definitely. And the book even addresses bias awareness burnout, getting overwhelmed by seeing bias everywhere.
How do you manage that?
A couple of strategies. Run the numbers. Realize the number of biased words you need to change is actually small compared to all language, and focus on the benefits. Bias busting leads to clearer communication, better decisions, understanding colleagues and customers better. It makes the work better.
To dig a bit deeper, the book briefly touches on brain science, System 1 and System 2 thinking. How does that relate to bias?
Okay, so System 1 is our fast, intuitive, autopilot thinking. Relies on shortcuts, associations. System 2 is slow, deliberate, analytical thinking, takes effort.
And prejudice comes from?
Often, it's System 2 lazily justifying System 1's biased shortcuts. Our quick stereotypes get rationalized after the fact. Overcoming that takes conscious effort, engaging System 2, questioning our assumptions, realizing social categories are often arbitrary and harmful if unexamined.
The book also talks about recognizing when we might be bullying, even if we don't mean to. The author's podcast story.
That's a very candid moment. She realized from feedback she'd essentially bullied a male colleague on air, excluding and mocking him based on gender stereotypes.
And her point is crucial. Turnaround is not fair play.
Exactly. Just because someone did it to you doesn't make it okay for you to do it back. It doesn't fix anything. Her owning it, apologizing, shows real self-awareness and accountability.
Which ties into respecting individual sensitivities, right? The word police idea.
Yeah. Her boss used that term not to stifle speech, but to say, look, effective teamwork means being mindful. Everyone has different triggers based on their experiences. If you want collaboration, you need to respect those sensitivities, even if you don't find a word offensive. It's about clear communication and inclusion, not just rigidly sticking to your preferred phrasing.
Which boils down to respecting individuality.
Seems obvious, but how often do we impose our expectations? How someone should look, feel, live? True respect means letting people define themselves and consciously avoiding letting our biases dictate who they should be.
The book then comes back to being an ally, offering a kind of cheat sheet for someone who has caused harm but wants to do better.
Right. Reinforcing that allyship is a process. Starts with self-awareness, owning potential biases. Requires self-forgiveness for mistakes, but also relies on others being willing to forgive as you learn and try to do better.
Like this story about Mitch using girl and the leader initially hesitating to give feedback.
Exactly. The leader realized her role meant she had to speak up, even if she might have let it slide personally in the past. For the sake of her team, the wider culture, she needed to address even seemingly small instances of harmful language. Leadership carries that responsibility.
Speaking of feedback, the book really hammers home its importance, especially for underrepresented folks. What makes feedback good in this context?
It has to be based on observable, changeable behaviors tied to clear expectations, not subjective personality traits.
So, no, just be more likable feedback.
Exactly. That's often the competence likability bias talking. And psychological safety is key. People need to feel safe making mistakes and pointing them out without fear. That's essential for growth.
For leaders wanting to implement bias interruptions effectively, what are the key strategies?
Number 1, create a genuinely safe environment where people can speak up without fear. Protect the person harmed, and protect the first person who flags bias.
Share the load.
Yes, make it everyone's job, not just the target's. Make it easy, agree on simple, non-shaming catchphrases. Take the shame out of correction. Minimize disruption generally, but know when you do need to disrupt, like a bias promotion discussion, That needs stopping right there.
What about codes of conduct? The book uses Johnson & Johnson as an example.
Shows how strong values can guide a company, but the book warns. Often leaders don't even know their own code or violate it.
So for a code to work,
It needs to set a floor for behavior, not just be aspirational fluff. And you need a fair, transparent system for finding violations and applying real consequences. Otherwise, it's just window dressing.
and dealing with actual bullies as a leader.
Pull them aside privately, be direct, spell out the negative impact, reiterate expectations, outline consequences if it continues, don't promote them, and be prepared to fire them if they don't change.
The Roy anecdote highlights taking it seriously, regardless of who is targeted, right? His bullying was dismissed until men were affected.
Exactly. A stark reminder to take all reports seriously.
What about bloviating? Dominating conversations.
Yeah, the author's debate story, how confident BS can win just by drowning others out. Leaders need to actively manage participation.
How?
Share research on why equal contribution matters. Watch body language. Make sure people prep for meetings. Gently interrupt the dominators. Create space for quieter voices. It's active facilitation.
This leads to the leader's role in preventing actual discrimination and harassment. How does the book define those?
Discrimination is bias plus power, excluding people from opportunities based on identity. Harassment is bullying plus power intimidating, creating a hostile environment.
And the contrast between institutional courage and institutional betrayal.
Courage is using authority proactively to address injustice. Betrayal is covering things up, protecting the org's reputation over people's safety. The author regrets times she didn't intervene more forcefully against harassment, highlighting the legal risks and, more importantly, the damage to morale and trust.
To really tackle bias, the book stresses quantifying it using metrics.
Yes, tracking data, lagging indicators like representation numbers, and leading indicators like applicant pool diversity at each hiring stage.
Examples.
Analyzing job descriptions for biased language, diverse interview panels, monitoring hiring and promotion rates by demographic. OpenTable used this to diversify engineering. HBSE focused on supporting working mothers. But the book notes limitations too, like blind auditions not always fixing BIPOC representation in orchestras.
And structured interviews. Kahneman's advice.
Define key traits first. Rate candidates on a scale, with evidence. Commit to hiring the top scorer. Resist gut feelings. Makes it more objective.
Even small things matter, like the couch anecdote.
Shows leaders need to investigate employee discomfort, even if the cause isn't obvious to them. Listening and addressing the physical space made a difference there.
The book also pushes leaders towards self-reflection on past hiring.
Yeah, be honest. Did bias play a role? Was culture fit a cover for bias against, say, a female candidate? Owning potential past bias is key to making better future decisions.
And intersectionality is crucial in representation efforts.
Absolutely. Women of color, men of color are often most underrepresented. Gender equity efforts need to prioritize women of color specifically, not assume a rising tide lifts all boats equally.
What about economic inequality?
Some CEOs are giving up equity to employees, but systemic barriers often block that for outsourced, lower-paid workers. Need more meaningful compensation for them, too.
Standardized, transparent salaries help.
Big time. Reduces bias in negotiation, cuts down the return on politics. Pleasing the boss shouldn't impact pay more than performance. Transparency promotes fairness.
And addressing negotiation bias directly.
Women get penalized for negotiating assertively. Leaders can interrupt that bias, or, maybe better, implement non-negotiable salary bands with routine, performance-based raises and bonuses. Takes negotiation bias off the table.
And don't just rely on market rates.
Because the market itself is often biased, companies committed to equity should offer fair pay, even if other biased companies offer less to women or more to men for the same role.
Bias sneaks into promotions too. The Laura story.
Vivid example. Denied promotion based on span of control, even though her unit was more profitable, shows how objective criteria can be twisted, leading to gaslighting. Need checks and balances in performance management, limit unilateral manager power.
Avoiding exclusionary bonding, like the strip club meetings example.
Crucial. Be mindful of how even normal team activities can exclude people. Intention doesn't negate impact. Leaders need to ensure socializing is inclusive.
Measuring team climate with surveys.
Simple, effective. Ask about psychological safety, trust, feeling valued. Do people feel safe admitting mistakes? raising tough issues? Are their skills valued? Breaking data down by demographics reveals where problems lie.
Ending NDAs and forced arbitration for harassment discrimination cases.
The book argues strongly for this, says they undermine accountability, protect perpetrators, silence victims. References, she said, catch and kill. Ending them is presented as vital for transparency and justice.
That competence likability bias comes up again, with the author being told she's objectively not likable.
Stark example of how managers can misread things through a biased lens. Even after considering the bias, her boss landed on her being the problem, not the bias itself. Highlights that unfair double standard women face.
Despite risks, the book argues for confronting injustice. The author regrets past silences.
Yeah, influenced by #MeToo, Sarah Kunst's story, challenges us to question if we overestimate the risks, especially those with privilege, the golden gag. The cost of silence can be high, too.
So, strategies for people harmed and for upstanders.
For the harmed, document everything for perspective, confidence, options, build support trusted allies, seek help HR, legal counsel. For upstanders, look for ways to create change, critically assess staying in toxic places. And the book details navigating HR reporting, legal advice, potentially going public, carefully weighing benefits and risks like institutional betrayal.
It also covers related issues like workplace drinking cultures.
Yeah, dangers there. Guidelines for responsible serving.
And physical touch.
Big emphasis on consent. Ask before touching, especially men touching women professionally. Reflect. Would you touch a man the same way? Author shares her own bad experiences, HR dismissal. Leaders need extra mindfulness due to power dynamics. No one touches anyone without consent. Period.
Handling workplace relationships.
Guidelines provided, especially around power imbalances or breakups.
And back to institutional courage versus betrayal for serious incidents.
Prioritize employee safety over reputation. Foster consent culture. Trusted reporting mechanisms. Thorough, fair investigations. Don't ask, why didn't you tell me sooner? Avoid passing the trash, hiring known offenders. Collect anonymous data on trust and leadership's handling of these issues. Listen to stories like Tarana Burke and #MeToo highlighted. Resist shame, silencing victims. Acknowledge the path to justice is complex.
The book really pushes understanding the dynamics of injustice, not just incidents.
Right. It's not inevitable, it's created by dynamics, like the conformity dynamic, pressure to fit in, excluding difference.
Contrasting individual bullying with systemic issues.
Yeah, her bullying experience versus a rape joke showing misogyny, coercion dynamic. Or her experience versus colleagues' anti-Semitism. Understanding sexism versus misogyny matters for intervening effectively.
Other dynamics mentioned.
Oblivious exclusion, white execs denying racism and badge incident.
Yeah.
Brutal ineffectiveness, complex office politics, bias, stereotype manipulation, and warns against self-righteous shaming, counterproductive, prevents growth. Advocates inviting in, not just calling out.
Zero tolerance isn't always the answer.
Can have unintended negative consequences. Goal should be fixing the problem via due process, learning.
Leadership's role is central again.
Absolutely. Take a stand, create respect, educate, don't just punish.
The story of Sally's rise illustrates this leadership impact well.
Shows how bias, abrasive not technical, showed up in reviews despite her success, but also shows the positive impact when the CEO recognized the gender bias and acted to fix it, leading to her promotion. Leadership awareness is key.
The book ends on hope, interconnectedness.
Yes. Recognizing shared experiences of injustice can unite people in interrupting it. The story of drag queens supporting Black trans lives shows that solidarity, if one goes down, we all go down. It's about eliminating oppression, replacing vicious cycles with virtuous ones of just work.
And it comes back to simplicity, despite the complexity.
2 core principles: respect colleagues for who they are, collaborate without dominating or coercing. That's the heart of it. Just work.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear addressing workplace injustice takes ongoing effort from individuals and organizations. We really hope this discussion has given you, our listener, a solid, digestible understanding of the key ideas from Just Work.
And maybe a final thought to consider. What's one small, concrete action you could take, maybe even today, in your own sphere of influence to foster a more just environment around you?
Yeah, what might be the ripple effect of just that one step?
We really encourage you to keep thinking about these themes, reflect on what resonated with your own experiences, and consider how you can contribute to building workplaces where everyone truly feels respected, valued, and able to thrive.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.